Hello, founders. We are Startups.com coming to you live. Happy to be here. We have an exciting show for everyone. Today, as we do every single Thursday, we do pitch decks on Tuesday, traction hacking on Wednesdays. We're going to be doing a Q&A session here. So you want to make sure you use the Q&A box or the chat box to ask your questions. I have my partner in crime, Will, with me. We'll introduce him in just a moment, but make sure that we are going to be covering. Let me just get all this organized here.
Yep.
One moment.
You got this, Ed. You got this. You've done this before.
I apologize. Oh, here we go. Here we go. It is. Oh, let's go back. Here we are. This is where I was supposed to be. Everything you wanted to know about co-founders, that is what we are going to be talking about today. And once again, get your questions ready. If you are watching this on the interwebs out there on social media, do the YouTube thing, like, comment, subscribe, share with a founder. We are prepared to answer any of your questions. Will, let's talk about you. 9-time funded founder. You got 5 exits. How many co-founders have you worked with? Just give us a thumbnail sketch on your experience with co-founders.
Yeah, I've had mostly good experiences with co-founders. I've done 9 companies. I'd say maybe half those had co-founders. And I actually, now that I think about it, I've been pretty fortunate. I've had, pretty smart, clever co-founders, not a lot of co-founder issues, so to speak. There's not zero issues, but not a lot of issues. And in every case, I think the most important thing for me in a co-founder was someone who I felt was outworking me. I think the goal for each of us should have been, you feel like that you're getting the good end of things and the other person's doing all the work because that co-founder's doing it. Now, the bad end of things is that's actually happening. Right? that you actually do feel like you're doing all the work and you're getting the short end of the stick. With my co-founders generally, I definitely felt like they were working as hard, that they were putting in as much effort. Some were obviously better than others. I had pretty good experiences.
We are going to get into those questions and more. Give you a little preview here. As always, like I said, use the Q&A box or chat to ask questions. Even if it's not about co-founders, something related, we'll make sure that we answer your questions. But we talk about these different misnomers or misconceptions that startups have, especially with co-founders. We're going to be asking questions like, what is a co-founder? Where do startups get this wrong? We'll cover that generally. How do you find a technical co-founder? How do you find a non-technical co-founder? How do you find the right co-founder that's as motivated as you? Will, you already touched on this, right? How to structure a co-founder deal, and then what? What happens after? Because I think founders can sort of miss on what happens after you go through that whole ordeal in the beginning. Once again, use the Q&A box or chat to ask questions. And before we continue, I would be remiss if I didn't share that this show is brought to you by us, Startups.com.
I love our own sponsorship.
I love it, right? It makes it so simple. If you're out there, you haven't checked out Startups.com, feel free to come to the website. A lot of resources here. Will, what's your invitation to everyone out there to join us here at Startups.com?
Yeah, I think the idea is, people come here, they like the content. Maybe you found us on YouTube and you like the content. But I think, Ed, like our secret sauce, if you will, is we're just kind. Right? So like come to us and just ask questions. Walk in and raise your hand and say, I have no idea how this one thing works, or I'm confused on this one thing. Our job is to figure this out for you. Our job is to help you see around corners and give you the answers to the test. So come to us. Let us do our job. We love it. This is my dream job, and I'm pretty sure it's yours too, Ed.
Not only do we want to be kind, we want to be generous in delivering that kindness. Just like Will invited you all to come and have a conversation with us. We're excited to talk to founders. Will, you're absolutely right. This is my dream job. I was telling my wife the other day, I said, I got it pretty darn good in terms of what I do on a daily. Not to say I haven't put in my dues, and you have as well, Will, but it's pretty fun living vicariously through these other founders. Let's jump into these first questions here, and we're going to try to get through all of them. And once again, keep reminding you, use that Q&A box or chat to ask questions. But first, what is a co-founder? Because the definition can kind of get diluted, Will. And where do startups get this wrong? I haven't had as many co-founders as you, but I would definitely say I've had probably the worst experiences ever with co-founders. And I think we need to get back to the definition of co-founders. How about we start there?
Okay. Let's get into it. So Ed, I'm curious. Now you piqued my curiosity. When you had these issues with co-founders, how often were you the problem?
Every time. I'm the common denominator. If I had to be totally transparent, it's kind of like people who complain about being in a string of bad relationships. Well, the common factor is you. Now, it's not to say I'm the only deciding factor, but I've learned a lot about how to even define co-founders and how I occur with co-founders. And so I take responsibility for my part, Will.
Yep. And not to suggest you didn't, but when you look at why things blow up or why things didn't work, most people, as you know, Ed, will just blame the other person, whether it's a co-founder, it's a spouse, whatever. Like that, the marriage didn't work because of them, or my business didn't work because of them. And I'm always interested to hear, well, what part of it didn't work because of you, right?
Yeah.
And where were you the broken cog?
Well, this is the reason I think this question is so important to start off with, because I think, Will, one of the first fundamental mistakes that I made is I confused co-founder with kind of like a partner, different degrees of partner, and employee. That was a difference. So it was like my expectations, their expectations. So they would come in thinking, well, I'm just an employee. And I'm like, no, I want you to act like a co-founder. And that's where things got muddy, Will.
I think so. Okay, so at some point, did you feel like they were overreaching?
No, actually, I probably did the most reaching when it came to that. I think that, and you touched upon it, they didn't work as hard as me, but I had different expectations. And I would say that because of the differences, the disparity of where we are coming from, I didn't spend the time establishing those definitions and what those expectations are. What is reaching? Like, how much reaching are we expecting?
Yeah. It's interesting. So when we talk about the spectrum between what should be a co-founder and what should essentially be an employee, a contractor, other definition, I always look at it, Ed, as, okay, is this person a co-founder because they just happened to be the first person that was willing to work here? Because that's the equivalent of saying, this is my wife because she's the first girl I ever met, right?
Yeah.
I mean, really, right? And I think it gets muddy because when I talk to founders and I ask them, I say, hey, they're saying, I'm looking to bring out a co-founder. I'm like, cool. How many other co-founders did you interview? The answer is almost always none. Right? Almost every time the co-founder becomes code for the first person that was willing to work on my idea. Now, think of how much bias there is, Ed, in that being the first person you brought on, okay? Meaning they didn't have something else to work on. You didn't give them any vetting whatsoever. You kind of knew them, but you never worked with them, things like that. Like, the first person you should bring on should be a contractor. Like, the most arm's length relationship ever, because you will never be in a more vulnerable position to seek help than when you're founding the company.
I think founders could serve themselves much better by just learning how to work with someone else by bringing on that contractor.
And I think a lot of people will say, well, we were coworkers, so I think we'll be good co-founders. That's like saying we were classmates, so we'll be good husband and wife, right? Not even remotely close, okay? As you know, Ed, the co-founder relationship goes so much deeper. It has consequence to it that a co-worker relationship doesn't have. Example, Ed, you and I, let's say we're working together, right? At whatever company, and things don't go well. You can quit, I can quit, and the consequence to each other is kind of zero. Now we both go 50-50 on a company. We're sharing the cap table, we're sharing the bank account, we're sharing employee responsibilities, and one of us just quits. The whole thing is messed up, right? The consequence is way different. They're not even remotely comparable.
And Will, how many times have we heard founders say, a co-founder left me high and dry? And now, they're holding my cap table hostage, or investors are mad. We don't know what we're going to do. They left with half the intellectual property, or the technical person left. It happens.
Listen, and so here's what I would say to kind of get back to the question, Ed. With a co-founder, I think a co-founder should be like the 15th date. A co-founder should not be, let's get married on the first date. A co-founder should be someone who we've spent a lot of time, months, maybe a year, on this project together, in a consulting relationship, an advisor relationship, and maybe an employee relationship. And now that I've had lots of cycles with them on this particular company, I'm willing to give it more. And you know what the other side of that, Ed, is? Giving them an opportunity to see what the hell they're getting into.
Yeah. You want to allow them to weigh in before they buy in. And a lot of times your expectations are wonky that way. But here's how I learned how to get it straight in my mind, Will. I learned that there's a difference between a co-founder, let's say, and that's defined by someone who shares the level of responsibility and emotional investment, especially commensurate to, like if it's 50-50, they need to be feeling that, you need to be feeling that. And maybe you don't do the same work. You kind of don't want to be doing the same work, but that's that level. They are right there, emotionally invested in the cap table as much as they might be financially or equity. Then there is a co-founding team. I heard this term, Will, co-founding team. And these are the first people that you bring on after you've kind of launched the product. Maybe you got some investment and you want them to have that level of investment, but they're not the same as the co-founder. Like you did, you have that same level of ownership. And then there are employees. And then there are contractors. And what you're advocating for, Will, is to go, hey, how about you start with a contractor? Because, Will, let's just face it. We see this all the time. So many founders just need the contractor. They don't need a co-founder. They just need someone to come. Insane. Even if you have them work for free, that's fine. But start them off as a contractor. So it's kind of going backwards. We start at co-founder, but really go contractor, employee, maybe founding team, and then maybe co-founder. That might be the better way.
And here's why. Because statistically, it's not going to work, right? Statistically, you're going to burn through your co-founder and it's going to break. So if you knew that, and the problem is people don't know this, if you knew that going in, Ed, guys like us who have done this many, many, many times over a very long period of time and have seen countless other people do this, we're fortunate enough that we have the experience that we understand why you don't get married on the first date. But most folks going into this simply don't have that experience, so they don't understand what those consequences really are. So they get excited and they jump in and they regret it.
But I'm curious your opinion on this, Will. We know that there are co-founder relationships where the two people aren't even deciding to work on a startup. They're just really good friends. They keep talking. Maybe one is technical, one's not, and they just mash it together and they built a relationship outside of the startup and they decide, hey, let's actually work on a problem together. They spend long nights at, the coffee shop, mashing it through, and they build something together. That is one way that we've seen co-founders come together. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I like it if you've got reps together, right? If you've got time together in the seat and you've worked together on things. But I think you don't really know who your co-founder is. And I keep using the analogy to a spouse until shit goes wrong. That's when you find out who your co-founder is.
Yes.
Okay. When things are going great, you don't have to address problems. Okay. It's when everything goes wrong and you're both hung out to dry. You missed a funding round, you missed payroll, you missed whatever. That's when you realize the quality of that individual, the quality of their commitment, and the quality of your relationship.
Great advice. Will, I see this all the time. You see it all the time. We go on Reddit, we go on chat boards, and people say, I've got this great idea. I'm going to change the world. Now I need someone to build it for me. How do I go get a technical founder? This is such a common request. Let's break this down because next time I see someone make that request, I'm going to send them this video. So let's give it to them.
Okay, let's start off with the difference between a technical co-founder and just someone to build something, okay? I remember hearing Ryan, our co-host on Startup Therapy, talk about this, and he used this analogy. He said, what people do when they look for a technical co-founder, it's like you want to build a house, and you're saying, I have to marry the carpenter in order to build the house.
That's
right?
a good one.
You don't need to marry a carpenter to build a house. You need to hire a carpenter to build a house, okay? Yes. Having a co-founder that also happens to be technical could be useful. It is by no means required. I was on a call earlier today. We do our office hours calls. One of our founders said, hey, I'm applying to YC, and they say you have to have a technical co-founder, so I'm looking for one. And I was like, that is the worst reason ever to find a technical co-founder.
Terrible reason.
Right. And it has nothing to do with YC. What I say is maybe you don't need a technical co-founder. Maybe you need a business development co-founder. And maybe you go hire someone to go write technology, right? To go build technology. But that is a moment in time. And someone will say, well, no, that's not true. We're building a mobile app, so we will always have a technical need. Sure, that's what a CTO is. Doesn't have to be a co-founder, right? That job exists. The fact that you're foisting co-founder on them in the management role and the consequence that comes with it isn't necessarily a good thing. And I think that's a dangerous start. What do you think?
Here's what happens, Will. I've seen this happen. Thankfully, I haven't run into this, but you need someone to build something. So instead of a contractor, you just say, hey, I want you to build this. I have no money. Build it for free. Come on board. Maybe twist their rubber arm. You get them interested. And then you're like, and in return, you're a co-founder. And you're going to be CTO. And everyone goes, oh, that's fantastic. And then you build it. And guess what? Maybe it starts to take off. And then the technical issues start to mount up. And especially if you got investors coming on board and they come by and they look at your CTO co-founder and you say, this is my CTO. And they go, well, your CTO doesn't have the experience as CTO. Woefully, thank you for participating in the beginning, getting you all this far. But now we need someone who actually has the skills, who has the experience. And then guess what? Everybody feels bad because the CTO can't be the CTO anymore. They're woefully underqualified. And then the co-founder relationship starts to break up. I've seen this happen, Will.
Listen, here's the thing with startups is that everybody gets the job for free, okay? And I think we can't lose sight of that. I'll give you an example, and I'll take the onus off of a CTO for a second. When someone says, well, I'm the CEO of a company, cool. Who did you beat out for the job? Oh, nobody you hired yourself? Wow, that doesn't make you a CEO. Right? You literally hired yourself and gave yourself a title. Yes, that's your job, but you can't run around saying that I'm the same as Elon Musk, right? Like you guys might have the same title, but you do not have the same capability. Same goes with a CTO. A person will come on to a startup, never been a CTO before, and they'll say, I'm a CTO. Okay, who did you beat out for the job, right? Oh, you're the only person that was willing to work for free, so that's how you became a CTO? That doesn't make you a CTO. That makes you the only person in the room. You just qualified as much for CTO as you did for janitor, because nobody wanted either of those jobs or could do them at the time, right? And so I think what you're touching on, Ed, is it's dangerous when we give somebody a title that has a much larger implication and pretend that they're actually qualified for it. Being the only person in the room doesn't make you qualified. It makes you the only person in the room.
Here's what I recommend. This is my power move, Will, and I'm curious what you would do and recommend. When I need, because I'm not technical, I know enough just to be dangerous and hack a few things together, prototypes and stuff, right? When I need a technical founder, if I have conceived of the idea and it's been my baby, I'm running with it and I'm at that point, I go out and I try and bootstrap, make some money, and then I hire a contractor to start building, and we just try one project together. And then as we get to know each other and I get to know them, maybe I'll repeat that and continue to pay them. Now, they're not getting full pop. I'm not paying them $250,000 a year like they went to go work at Amazon, right? Yeah. But then we start having conversations. And if they show signs of being someone, I say, hey, maybe you'd want to work here full time. And then I find out how they want to be incentivized. And if they say, I'm up for becoming a co-founder and playing that part of the startup, I may just keep them as employees and just, let them grow into it. But then we start having those conversations and we get those reps in, like you said, and then poof, co-founder is the conversation. That's where we end up. That's how I do it.
I think, absolutely. I think what we're talking about here is co-founder is something that you grow into. You don't start with and work backward. It makes no sense ever. Now, I understand why people do it. They do it because they're like, I have no money, and it's the only currency that I can use to incentivize someone to work for free. I totally get that, okay? But you're overselling it, right? The only currency to get your technical co-founder and really your product built isn't 30 to 50% of your company. That is bananas, right? You're basically paying $100,000 for an oil change when you do that. What you have to be able to say is, number one, this person may never ship anything. So saying they're a technical co-founder does not mean they're actually good at their job. They're just the only person that you have. Give them some time to prove themselves, have them invest equity over time, but have them take a larger stake, a larger role when they've proven they can do something. Don't just give it to them and see what happens. That's the equivalent of somebody coming on, Ed, and let's say to a regular company, let's say Google, and Google says to you, Ed, we're going to pay you $5 million up front because we believe for the life of your career, you're going to generate that much value while you work at Google. And we hope that you stay long enough to do that.
Sign me up, Will. That sounds absolutely great. It sounds great.
That's exactly what's happening.
But guess what, everyone, all of you listening, if you're going to be raising money, you are going to have to defend your cap table. And if you play stupid games at the beginning, you're going to win stupid prizes. Investors are going to make sure. And so that's the warning. Will, let's look at the question that came in. It came in the Q&A box. Should I remove myself from the team slide as a co-founder and co-inventor if an advisor has more industry experience to maximize investor confidence, thinking to put the CEO, lead engineer, and director of operations?
Okay, no, because I get it. Actually, I respect the humility there. But no, because they're investing in you, not the advisor. At the end of the day, you not being there would displace why they're making the investment. In other words, if things go sideways, the advisor isn't going to save things. It's you. That's the horse that they're betting on. And so you got to be front and center. Now, after you, who the other co-founders are, the other people on the team slide, et cetera, I would say try to lead with the people that have the most amount of weight and value to the startup. But I think it would be damn near impossible to say to an investor, you should invest in this, but we're not leading with the team.
Here's another a take on it, like a look on it, plus a story, Will. A lot of times, if you can bring on great advisors who are smarter than you actually get more confidence from the investor as a CEO, because the investor says, oh, wow, like there's a founder and I was listening to the angel investor and he put in a significant amount of money and the founder had no clue how to build anything, wasn't the expert in the space, but somehow managed to get people to quit NASA and like big airline companies like completely quit their jobs to come work for him because he had the vision. He had this X factor as far as a leader. And the investor literally said, I don't know how you got all these people to quit, go on your team, but you're the CEO that I would invest in, and then wrote the check, right?
Right.
The opposite has also occurred. Well, talk to a founder, used to be a member here of Startups.com. We have a lot of them come through. Fantastic founder, knew their numbers, their business, could build stuff inside out. And an investor said, with a fund, a firm, said, we're going to pass because we don't see you bringing on smarter people. We haven't seen you bring on a landmark hire, like an executive, poach someone, draw someone together. And so they said, we don't have confidence in your CEO, your presence, your abilities to build a team. And that's the opposite as well.
Yep. And look, and to be fair, and I'm sure you would echo this, that's one investor's opinion.
Sure.
That same person could talk to 10 more investors and never get that feedback again. I always say when people think about like, I had a guy ask me today a question about, hey, what will investors think about this? I always open up with some investors might feel this way. Some investors might feel this way. There's no one size fits all answer for any of this. So going back to the original question that was posed about, should I put myself there? There might be an investor somewhere who feels totally different. They're humans. They all have different opinions.
That's
right?
true. Yep.
You ask 10 investors their opinion, you're going to get 10 different opinions, right? There's no such thing as this is what all investors want, need, do, care about. There is such thing as here's what most investors tend to care about, and it does help to optimize that, but you're going to get a million different opinions.
Great questions that are coming in. We're going to try to answer them. Will, we're on a roll. How do you find a non-technical co-founder? And I want to show the other side because, Will, we have a lot of founders that are technical that come here and they go, I kind of suck at business and et cetera. So, you know what, let's talk about this for a moment. Let's step back, Will. I'm curious your opinion. Do you think technical founders need non-technical founders? What are your thoughts on just going there with that?
I do. If I'm being honest, I do. And here's why. The thing about a technical founder is the nature of being technical tends to be a little bit one-dimensional.
True.
Right?
Yep.
Technical folks tend to have a highly specific skill set that sometimes runs at the expense of other skill sets. Okay? So let me give you some examples. For folks that are highly technical, sometimes I'm kind of, this isn't always true, but it's true enough that I'm going to say it. They're not always the most social folks, right? Right? Sometimes just not, right? They invested a lot of time in being technical at the expense of some social side. Or because they weren't that social, they found the technical side kind of diving in to be more appealing. And the reason I say this is because I actually grew up with both. I'm a total weirdo in that way. And Ed, I know you well enough. You have some of this too. I was a super deep nerd and I was super outgoing at the same time.
Yeah.
Which sounds kind of almost running antithetical. But here's what would happen. I don't like technology. I love technology. And when I was a little kid and I got my Commodore 64 computer in the 80s, I was on that thing, dude, right? 24/7. I was on a 300 baud modem. Right, which you can't have less baud, right?
Oh man,
people you're like, oh man, I the 56K or whatever 57K like modem. This is 57,000 versus 300. Okay, so this is that long ago. You could watch the bytes go across. Anyway, my point is, I've been at this for a long time, and I loved my computer. Right? I love technology, okay? But I also really enjoyed being outgoing and doing other things. I watched a lot of my friends who were really onto the technical side absolutely eschew anything that was like social or anything else like that. So I get those guys. I understand why they were so focused on technology, but I also watch them, this is my point, I also watch them not develop these other skills. Now let me go to the other side of my super extrovert side, right? Where I love sales and I love marketing and I love putting on events and things like that. That person and all the people I would meet in that world would have incredible charisma, but they rarely had the ability to actually know how to build anything.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They were great at selling it. They couldn't build anything. So going back to the original question, if I'm a technical founder, I'm going to look at these other skills, could be social skills, creative skills, marketing skills, etc. And I need to value those as much as I want my technical skills to be valued. And I want to look at somebody as the wizard of those skills.
I tell founders all the time, someone has to build, someone has to sell, everybody has to talk to users. And so if you can spread that around, but I'll just be very transparent. Will, you said something very astute. I think it's important. All investors have a different opinion. And I'm just going to share from my standpoint of writing angel checks and being a partner at a fund and making recommendations for checks, when I see a technical solo co-founder or founder, I worry, because if they can just build whatever, I find they just run around, they're building,
Yeah.
to your point, and I get worried about their focus. And that's when I actually look for them to have at least another technical founder, somebody to just balance them out, bounce things off of. Because if you're building, it'd be great to have someone talk to users and be selling to get that feedback loop. And I'll even go so far. I know a lot of investors say we won't invest in solo non-technical founders.
Yeah.
But I'm okay in the beginning if you start off as a non-technical founder, and let's say you hired a contractor and you're selling and you're making money. I'll go, we can hire an engineer. We can hire these people later. But that's what worries me about pure technical founders that can kind of build anything. To your point, they're kind of all over the map. And I really worry that my dollars are going to just kind of hemorrhage all over the place and them just building.
Well, the other side of it too is that's awesome that you can build things. How are you going to get anybody to buy it? How are you going to market it? How are you going to sell it? Right. So if you're building in a vacuum, who cares? Right. It's as, if nobody knows about it, it's good as it doesn't exist. Right. So when I look at somebody that's technical and they're building this wonderful technical thing, I'm kind of like, okay. And then, like, what do you mean? And then I built it. I was like, who cares? If you can't find any customers for it, if you don't become good at that, it doesn't matter that you can build it. I go to the flip side. Somebody that's got the great idea, they can get it in customers' hands, but they can't build it. Now, in both cases, you can hire people, not co-found, you can hire people to do those things. But
Absolutely.
If you are looking for a founder, somebody, a partner at that level, what I look for is how do they complement you? How can they do something that you can't do? Now, here's what's interesting. It doesn't mean that they have to have a totally different skill set, okay? I've seen great partners that are both creatives. I've seen great partners that are both technical, right? And when I say that, their complements are something else. They complement because maybe one is more conceptual and the one is more execution. They complement because maybe one is more conservative and the other is more aggressive. There's different ways to make those complements, but I do think there is some value when you find those right connections.
And investors are going to look for that too. Make sure that you complement each other. Here's my power move, Will. Same thing. We're just put all our best practices on the table.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not technical, but there have been times when I have been the technical person because I run all the IP, I do all the delivery. I was building for the most part. And I find that non-technical founders that can sell are actually very motivated by partnering with people who can build it, because they're like, oh, I get to be a part of something and I get to have ownership in something instead of like be a mercenary. Like I get to be an actual missionary about the product. And I look for founder market fit if they're going to eventually be a founder. So I immediately look, can they, we talk about this with Ryan, our CMO, about the traction hacking, but can they put a list together of 200 people, and can they immediately call, and do they take a shine? Do they care about the problem? And are they just totally passionate about getting that solution out in the world? And if that's the case, I go, that's going to be a compliment. And they could be creative. They could do other things. We'll fill that out. But for me, I like to say, hey, what would it look like for us to work together in that way? And that's how I get my non-technical founders. I make sure that they're in that selling seat first.
Yep. What you're saying, though, is you want to see them get some traction.
Oh, yeah.
Right? It makes sense. I also want to caveat, never hire a co-founder, because it will get you an investment. Right?
True. Yep.
That is the wrong reason to hire someone. That's like saying, I want to get married so I can have kids. You should want to have kids, but you should want to have them with the right person, not just here's a human that fits, in so I can have kids as a mechanism. Right? Like I think that's a dangerous game. Here's a few reasons why. One, that just doesn't work. Right? It's not like if you get a co-founder, you will get investment. And conversely, it's not like if you don't get a co-founder, your idea is all of a sudden shit. Right? Like it's how you sell it. When people say that they want you to have a co-founder, what they also mean is they want the right team around you to get stuff done. Okay? So just bear in mind that it doesn't have to be a co-founder, and there's a good chance investors won't be part of your future. So hard coding a co-founder into your future because you might get an investor is ridiculous.
Dangerous too. Could become something that you're going to regret. Often it becomes. And by the way, everyone, Will and I, we're about to launch our next venture about relationships and family advice, because that's what we like to do here. And hey, I'm just going to say it, Will. I spent time with you and your family, and you're a family man. Like, we're not talking from a point where we observe these things. We're actually comparing it to real world relationships. You and I were both married old dudes, raising kids, running around, all that stuff. It's fun to compare life together.
I agree.
That way.
And the parallels are very strong because in both cases, they're highly committed relationships.
Here we go, Will. Let's really get into the nitty gritty. How do you find the right co-founder that's as motivated as you? Will, let me couch the reason this question comes up, because I see this on Reddit, I see this on the forums, And it's like I started with my co-founder, and then now we're like 6 months into it, maybe a year, maybe we raised some money, and now the shine's coming off. Will, they're not working as hard as me. I don't know how to do this. Like, I'm starting to question. And I always say, by the time you have to talk about it like that, writing's probably on the wall. So how do we avoid, like, let's get into and talk about how do we get that co-founder that's as motivated as us and not make those mistakes?
Well, it's a few things. Let me give you a story of where I had my first co-founder. It came in a different way, so I'll give you some backstory. So early in my career, when I was 19, I started my first company, which was an interactive ad agency, one of the first web design companies in 1994. I started by myself. A couple years into it, we ended up merging our agency with a traditional agency, one that had been around for a long time. They had brought on kind of a new partner to help lead the next generation of the agency. I was just turning 22 at the time. He was 26 at the time. So both of us very young at the time. He wound up being the hardest working co-founder I've ever had. And I want to tell you this story because I want to explain to you what that actually looked like. Okay. Now I'm going to talk about long hours and things like this.
Sure.
This isn't me like glorifying long hours. I'm just saying it's a pretty good proxy for how things went. We would have a race as to who could get into the office first. Okay. Forget what that means for a second. Right. And I'm talking like 5, 6 in the morning. Right. Like I'm talking bananas early. Okay. Hours before our employees would ever show up. Okay. Now we never said a word to each other about it. I never said one time ever that I'm going to get in before you.
Oh, that's interesting. Very interesting.
But I didn't have to. Okay. There were 2 cars in the first 2 parking spaces at our office, and they would face each other. And they were mine and Blaine's. Okay. And every day it would be about whose car was there first. I'll be honest, it was usually his.
Wow.
Okay. Now I'm the most motivated, ambitious person I know, and he outworked me. Okay. Now, I'm gonna caveat that by saying that was like 30 years ago, right? That was a long time ago when working yourself to death was fashionable. I would never recommend that in a million years, okay? To have this race to who's gonna get in the parking lot first, and you probably don't have an office. I guess it's who's gonna be on Slack first. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay.
My point is, although Ed, you could attest, I am on Slack at 4 a.m. So.
Oh my word, you are.
So maybe I'm still doing it. Anyway, my point is this. I felt so good about driving to work in the morning because I knew the guy across from me that was going to park was going to be there before me, or if I was there before him, he was going to be there right after me. And he cared about whether he was there. Now, us parking early in the morning is a metaphor. It has nothing to do with what time we show up for work. It has to do with how committed we were to each other into this business. And so our work ethic collectively was perfect together. Right. And years later, like, when he and I grab lunch or something, even now, like, 30 years later, and we talk about it, we have huge smiles on our face, tremendous amount of respect between us. And I love that. That is so hard to find.
100%. I could not agree more. But Will, if I remember the story correctly, you had previous reps with this individual before you decide to partner together. And I think this goes back to what we've been talking about. I'm going to repeat it if someone's just watching this clip unto itself, is you find out ahead of time if the reps will justify the continued relationship. And the more reps you have, the more you can build that foundation so you can make that decision. So you're not in that situation where later on you're regretting that decision. So that's something that I think we need to talk about. But I'm going to say something very Machiavellian, and I'm curious your opinion. One of the ways that I keep my co-founders, and I have done so in the past, motivated and accountable, is that I reserve the right to fire them. Like, I say someone has to be the CEO, and we have an operating agreement. And if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, either you can go to the board and get the chairman to say Ed's not pulling their weight and get me fired, or I can make the decision and get you fired, and you lose your shares. Like, you'll walk away with maybe like 2%, 3%, even if you're vested 50%. I literally have that written into the operating agreement. And I know some people go, well, that's not cool, Ed. And at the same time, Will, I'm someone who is willing to give 50% of my company. They say, I want half of your company. I'll say, I'll put you on a vesting schedule. I'll put you on a cliff. You can have half. You can have my job. You can replace me. Here's what we need to see. So I want to give out and promise as much equity, but how we get there, I'm pretty stringent upon what our agreements say. I'm curious what you think.
I'll be honest, Ed, I've never heard that, and I love it.
That's good.
No, I've never heard it, and I can't believe I've never heard it. What you said, Ed, you said, I want to reserve the right to fire you. And what that's literally saying is, are you confident enough in your ability to always perform that I will never regret you coming here?
Exactly.
Now, it's not just that. When you say, I reserve the right to fire you, that creates a safety issue. Okay, I
Sure.
just want to be clear, right?
Yes, for sure.
It doesn't just say, are you motivated? It says, how comfortable are you being unsafe? And most humans are not comfortable being unsafe. Now, that said, okay, really interesting about that concept or that question is that for a lot of people, they don't have the confidence in their output to be able to stand behind that requirement. Which to be fair, even a good person, I could see backing down on that, but a great person won't back down on that. I think that's really interesting. It's a fascinating filter.
And before everybody kind of flames me out there in social media land, which people tend to do for my strong opinions, I make sure the streak goes both ways. I've been in positions, Will, where someone's asked me to be a co-founder, and they've actually said, I want you to be the CEO. And I've said, I will put myself on a vesting schedule and a cliff, and we will hammer it out so that you, if after 1 year, you're, before the 1 year anniversary, you're like, no, this didn't work out, fire me. And I'll walk away with nothing. I will literally sign everything away because as to your point, Will, I never want to go in a situation as a co-founder because I know the emotional toll it takes. I know the commitment without fully 100% believing that I will do everything I possibly can to deliver. And I put my money where my mouth is.
Yep. Easy to say, hard to do.
Yes. And that is for all of you out there, just like your wives, I always say, or your spouses, if you've got a great partner who supports you, this crazy venture called startups, go and appreciate them right now. Same with really great co-founders. There are many times, Will, that I'm sitting there listening to other founders, and then I go, you know what? I just need to send Will a message and say, I appreciate you being my CEO. It literally happens all the time.
Honestly, it's the gratitude out of my end is incredible. Fun fact is, about being a CEO, you almost never get a high five. It's a weird thing. Your job is to give everybody else high fives. It doesn't occur to anybody to give them back.
Loneliest position on the planet. Also, being a co-founder, it's not the same as other partners in small businesses. So the whole point is we empathize with all you founders out there. We know it's different.
Very much so.
Here's the last question. How to structure a co-founder deal. We've touched on this, but let's walk through some mechanics. And then what do you do, Will, after it's like, okay, we're co-founders, yay. Now, how do we actually maintain this relationship, make sure that we are all getting to the point where we can say we don't regret this decision whatsoever?
Okay, so there are a few things that are fundamental to the co-founder relationship. I'm going to say there are two things specifically. One, how do you earn over time? Because you need a time element. And two, what do we do when we realize this was a bad decision? What's the eject plan? Okay. Now, the way you have to propose it to your co-founder is in a way where it feels like you could both have this issue. Okay. In fact, if you're really clever about how you present it, you need to put it in their head that they should be worried about if you're the issue.
Oh, nice. Power move. Love it.
Okay. Yeah, well, right. But because most people don't fundamentally have empathy, like they can't think, in other people's shoes, you have to put that thought in their shoes. And it looks something like this. Ed, let's say you and I are having this conversation, okay? My pitch to you would look like this. Hey, Ed, going into this, let's say we're 50-50 partners, just to make it simple. I've read a lot about the fact that life can happen with co-founders, and I want to put a plan in place that if things go sideways, that we both have some way to rectify. For example, if I run into a huge issue in my life and I can't contribute to the business anymore, I don't think it's fair that you have to carry both of us, right? And vice versa. Okay. So what I think would make sense is that for a period of a year, 2 years, whatever we think that break-in period should be, every month that goes by, each of us earns our pro rata or same share of equity. Okay. But if in that time, and we should agree on what that threshold is, a year or 2 years, whatever it's going to be, in that time, one of us decides to bail. Like if I decide to bail, I don't want to feel guilty about it. If I decide to bail at month 3, I don't earn any more equity. Okay. And we both agree that unless both of us stick it out, we do not have the same amount of equity. I can't work for 3 months and then say, cool, I own 50% of the company. Now work for the rest of your life on my behalf. Right. That would be a dick move. And there's no way you should agree to that. You see what I'm saying with the way I'm presenting that?
I totally see it. I like the way that you're making it collaborative. Like we're in this together. Let's talk about it together.
Yep. If I present it as, Ed, I'm not sure if you're going to stick around and I don't want to get screwed if you do. So I want to make sure if you do anything wrong, I get your equity, right? That is the most selfish, childish way to present something to another human, and you deserve to get shut down if that's the way you present it, right?
Sure.
You have to present it as if they understand that they could be the victim, because it's the only way most people are going to fundamentally appreciate the nature of this relationship.
We're talking about let's hope for the best, but plan for the worst together, right? And now we're taking for granted. These are some of the mechanics we want all the founders to look at. And again, this is just so that if you're listening to this clip unto itself, look up vesting schedule, cliffs, partnership, co-founder, operating agreements. Paperwork is extremely important. So not only that, Will, I can have that conversation with you, but then what would make me feel safe is let's write it down. Let's agree on a piece of documentation so that later on, if it comes up and I'm like, I don't think that's what you said or I didn't interpret it, we can go back to a piece of paper. That kind of helps as well, really undergird this relationship the way that we're structuring it.
Correct. And I think the way you described that, Ed, where you said it's kind of like we're planning the divorce when we start the marriage, that's exactly the way that business partner that I mentioned that he and I would race to work, that's the way he presented it to me. I was 22, he was 26. The difference between my background, where I grew up super poor, and his background is his dad started the I think they're number 14 on the Fortune 500, Cardinal Health, $200 billion company, right? His dad started that. He had a much different perspective on how these things go down, right? Because he had a better coach in his corner. And the way he presented to me was the same. He said, look, I understand like we're actually doing our deal. We're merging our companies right now. But the reason we have to have these hard conversations is so that if they ever come up, we had them when we were on equal footing. We had them when things were good and we could be reasonable with each other. We don't want to have this conversation when things go bad or try to make these agreements when things go bad, because then we'll never resolve it. And we did. And what was really interesting, and in that time, every time there was a little bit of an issue between us, we always knew exactly what was in the operating agreement and exactly what our conditions were and exactly what we had to respond to. And I remember every time thinking, man, I'm glad we agreed on that when times were good, because I'd be really pissed off right about now if we were trying to do that from scratch.
You bring up a really great point. Now I'm going to go back to marriage. Well, fun fact, some might be horrified, but I actually, when courting my wife and we were engaged and we were talking through all the different things, we talked about all the stuff like where are we going to vacation. Like we actually went for premarital counseling and we talked about all these things, and then we agreed. We picked people to say, if things go wrong, who would we go to get help from? And then we picked someone mutually between us.
Love it.
And said,
Arbitrary.
we both trust this person, right?
Yep.
And if I'm not listening, you can go to that person and they can come kick my ass, and vice versa. And then if we're both at an impasse, we'll go to this person and we'll agree we'll do whatever they say. And we actually made that agreement.
I love
that. Yeah, what's crazy, we've never had to do it.
That's the point, though, right? You both know what the conditions as well as the response are. So you can look at that and say, okay, I understand like how to get out of this, so to speak, or how this will go. What you don't want is to have never had that conversation and have two totally different ideas of how this thing gets resolved. That's painful.
I'm going to twist your rubber arm for two questions. Yeah. One comes from our Q&A, and this is actually really good. I'm glad. Thank you, founder, for putting this into the chat here. How should I structure equity for an advisor who wants to join without a vesting period or a cliff, only with a monthly hour commitment? This is a good one, Will. It comes up a lot.
I think that in this particular case, in most cases, the founder doesn't have a lot of leverage here. I just want to put that out there because a lot of times when you get this advice, someone will say, oh, you never do that without a vesting cliff. And they have like no self-awareness when they give this advice that maybe that founder doesn't have a lot of other options and they need that advisor and they're going to have to go without a vesting cliff or whatever. It's not their first choice, but they don't have a second choice.
That's a good point, Will. Now, I'm going to counter that a little bit and say, I would never bring on an advisor without a vesting period. I have advisors come to me all the time and they say, and I don't even do this, Will. Street goes both ways. This works both ways. I would never ask a founder to give me shares right out of the gate because it just implies there's so many implications to it. If an advisor came to me and I said, I'd really like your advice, and they said, well, I just want half a point of your company right away, I'd be like, no, thank you. How about I just pay you hourly or figure out when I can do that? That's literally what I would do.
Chances are this founder, like 99% of founders, doesn't have the cash to pay them hourly.
Yeah.
Right. So that's always tricky. The second thing is they're an advisor. There's someone you're trying to court and bring in. So you're trying to lower friction, not increase friction, which is always an issue, right? Most people don't have their choice of any advisor they want. They kind of get what they get. Similar to investors. Like when people give the advice to say, you should choose only the best investors. It's like, dude, only one person's even remotely interested in investing in my company. Like the last thing I'm worried about right now is choosing the best investors. I'm worried about having any at all. But my point here is I think what we're really talking about, Ed, is being able to go back to this advisor and make an equitable offer, make an equitable counter.
Negotiate.
Okay? So exactly. A couple ways to do that. One way could be, would you be willing to invest for a short period, just for a few months, so we can have a little bit of a break-in period to make sure both of us like working with each other, and then we'll move on to that more structured commitment? Now, the advisor's typically going to say, well, no, my time has value and I want my time paid for. And what you say is, I get that. It does have value. But we both need to make sure that this was a good idea for both of us. Give me a little bit of time. Give me 90 days before I start paying out. Because here's what's going to happen. In 50% of the cases, they're not even going to make it to the 90th day. Here's why. It's so easy to say, I'll give good advice, I'll give good whatever, it's really hard to keep doing it. And I think that's the danger. So even if you can't get a long-term vesting period, if you can negotiate any kind of short-term break-in period, right? Where you can say, again, would you give us the first 90 days? And if we make it past 90 days like a cliff, you'll get what you want. But just give me a little bit of time to make sure that this works for both of us. If it does, if you're a bad advisor, why would I want to give you equity? And if you're a good advisor, why would I not want to give you equity?
That's
give me an
such a
opportunity to show.
It's a good point. Yeah, I think other ways, maybe we're saying the same thing, but let's say, how do we unwind the deal? Like, let's say we can't stand each other, right? And
Yep.
I use the same technique you do, in that I say, you may hate working with me as a founder anyway, and you're going to want to unwind it. So that makes a lot of sense. Here's my last question, Will, and I think this is good to brainstorm. Back to this, how to structure a co-founder deal, and then what? I want to talk about the and then what. Let's bullet through some just quick suggestions how we maintain co-founder relationships. Like, are we talking like weekly meetings, stand-ups, annual reviews? How do you like to continue greasing the wheels and keeping things going with your co-founders?
I got to tell you, at the very least, Ed, at the very least, on a quarterly basis, have a check-in that says, what do you expect from me in the next 3 months?
Nice. Yep, that's
what
good.
do you expect from me in the next 3 months? Now, when I say that, it's very purposeful why I'm saying this. Number one, you got to give them long enough to get it done. If you say, what do you expect from me in the next week? I mean, that's silly, right? So a long enough period that can get done. A short enough period, though, that they actually have to get it done by that point. So when you're saying, what do you expect of me? What you're also saying, you're qualifying that by saying, what would you like to see me get done, completed, finished in the next 90 days? And keep doing that check-in every 90 days, but it has to be mutual, right? So you're both going to each other. And that's where you start to see the cracks in the dam, okay? Because the important part, and Ed, actually, you can appreciate this because we do this at Startups.com. Every week, we talk about what are we going to get done by the end of the week, okay? That's our check-in as a team. Okay. But Ed, as you know, we record all of those answers every single week. We put them in a spreadsheet, nothing complicated, right?
We
like
do.
Asana or something like that. Just a spreadsheet, just a Google Doc. And what we do is we keep a record of every time that actually gets done. We have those records going back a decade. Okay. So if you've been working here that long, you can go back for a decade and say, this is how much I got done. Now, here's where that applies to the startup, okay? For a startup, for the co-founders, you get to be able to say, here's what I expect you to do, and back and forth. And Ed, you get to tell me the same thing, but we have to capture it. We have to commemorate it. And more importantly, at the end of the quarter, we have to revisit it because everyone kind of knows when they didn't put points on the scoreboard, okay? And so when that period comes, call it 3 months, and Ed, you and I are comparing notes, unless I was the technical side and you were biz dev, and you said to me, I expect you to get the mobile app shipped. 3 months goes, and I committed to it. I said, I will get that done. 3 months goes by. We look at that scoreboard, no mobile app, okay? I look at you, and I said, I expected you to get LOIs, letters of intent, from 3 companies. 3 months go by. We have no LOIs. You see what I'm saying? Like, we need something that starts to say, dude, you either contributed or you didn't.
Yeah, that's like a delegation / accountability / tracking.
It's super simple.
It's a simple, and it's a system. I think that's the functioning word.
Yep.
There are systems you can do. Let me take it a little abstract, and this goes to our relationship, Will. I don't think there's a week that goes by that you and I don't have a personal conversation about something not related to work. Right?
I hope so. Yeah.
And I think I'd recommend that to founders as well. I like to try and have one conversation at least a week with my co-founders, my core team, outside of the work. Just, find out, hey, how's it going? Even if it's for 5-10 minutes. And I find that kind of just gives me a little bit of that extra relational cushion when things get hard, because things do get hard.
Things do get hard. I agree. And we call that having something in the bank with somebody where, where you've had enough good reps that when shit comes due, you can take a little bit out and go back. And I'm very proud to say that I feel like I have a lot in the bank with you and all the other folks on the team, so that when things go sideways, and they do, life's weird, right? That we can we've been through some things like this before. This too shall pass.
Will, I think we crushed this one. We got some nice comments thanking us. And chat said we sound profound. Okay. And that's, I'll take it. Will. Mostly large part into you. You make me look great. I appreciate having these conversations. To all of you out there who joined us, thank you so much. If you are listening to this on a recording, feel free to leave a comment, ask questions. We will track them, compile them together, and answer them in a show like this. We are here every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Tuesdays, pitch decks. Wednesdays, traction hacking. Thursdays, we do this Q&A. Will, what's the final word? What's your encouragement to everybody out there?
If you watch any of our videos and you're like, hey, I'm thinking about taking on a co-founder, the universal advice here is slow it down. It's the same when people say, hey, I'm thinking about getting married. Just give it as much time as you can. Okay. You will never regret having waited a little bit longer and learned a little bit more in order to figure out how to get in this relationship, right? The co-founder business is a relationship business and you need to take it slow.
Could have said it better myself. That's it for us, everyone. Have a fantastic day. See you soon.
Bye, guys.